Thank you all for chipping in to Cast a Commotion, the Flesh and Blood podcast sponsored by Crash Command Games. It's going to be part of the family of podcasts that talk about multiple card games. This one, like I said, is focused on Flesh and Blood. And today we're going to be talking about how to get into the game, where to find the game, what to do once you do find the game, and just kind of a small beginning guide into how to get your first game going. This first one is going to be about Flesh and Blood. It's my current passion right now. It's just got an absolute competitive edge over any other card game. It's got a very unique system. It's not really comparable to anything else I've played. That's what was so interesting, was it wasn't using a land system. It didn't use an energy system. You made use of every part of the card, introduced full card playability at every turn. Yeah, you're going to have your off turns, but you're always able to do something. Like all card games, it's imperfect. It's got imperfect knowledge, etc., etc. But that's definitely going to be the focus of today. We're going to be talking about how to get into Flesh and Blood, what I'm going to be as a podcast. I'm going to be a semi-competitive look into it. While I do have access to many of the cards, I like to think that some of them are crutches, and I have my own style, so I don't go full, I saw this win, I'm going to play it. There's nothing against that in this podcast. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people just don't have the time to sit here and develop a deck or playtest that much. That's just reality. So I want to give other ways to help people speed through those processes. I want to talk about what products would be a good starting point, how to play your first game, getting into good habits, and suggested heroes to start with. As I said, this is going to be a semi-competitive look into Flesh and Blood. What does that mean? I have been to a few big events. I've won a few local, sizable events. I've traveled a little bit. I've top 8'd a few times at some of those mid-range events. I got cut on a pretty irritating tiebreaker at the calling that I went to from top 64. These things happen. I feel like I'm okay. I feel obviously if I did really lean into some of those more obvious cards, I might have done better. So that's what I mean when I want to be a semi-competitive perspective into this game. I probably could get there, but I like to do things my own way at the same time. What do I mean by that? There's going to be certain cards in every card game. Talking about Magic the Gathering, you'd be looking at like Sol Ring, right? You just have to goddamn include that card. Many of these other card games will just have these very, very staple cards. In Flesh and Blood, as you'll become aware over the time that we talk about this game on this podcast, you're going to hear Enlightened Strike, Art of War, Command and Conquer. You're going to hear those cards over and over. People love to use those cards. When I say crutch, try not to think pejorative. I do not think it is a bad thing to use these cards. I just think they're a little lazy. They do make your turn decision way easier. And obviously, in a competitive card game, there is room for that. To make your turn easier is optimal. It's what you want. I'm not going to explain what those cards are right now. I do want to go over card ratings and primers for decks and cards to consider, etc. Just know that you're going to see those cards a lot whenever you step up to a competitive table, and you're going to hear them a lot when you're in the gaming space. So that was just kind of like how we're going to be viewing Flesh and Blood, what lens we're going to be using for Flesh and Blood. It is going to be the semi-competitive creativity look. Next, we're going to talk about how to get into the game, how to get started. It really is as simple as walking into any local game store, which is the whole point of the game. Another talking point that's drilled into our skulls over and over again as we continue into this hobby, listen to other media outlets. You'll hear many people talk about this. Flesh and Blood, they want players playing it in the Flesh and Blood. This gets repeated over and over again. There are online outlets. You are welcome to use webcam games, obviously. We all got set up for that during the 2020 to 2022 era. But ideally, the lead of the company wants you playing this card game in the person because he has great memories, as we all do, of playing Magic, Pokemon, just getting around and talking with friends, hanging out in the same space and just really, really duking it out with our cards. That's how easy it is to get into the game, is walk into your local game store, ask if they have it. If not, move on to the next one. In my local area, we are a haven of game stores. I lived in Seattle for a time, and there weren't this many game stores. There just weren't. I think in my local area we have 14 game stores within a 10-mile radius to my location. It is insane the amount of game stores we have. I want to say only 4 to 5 of them carry Flesh and Blood. As much as the card game world and the trading card game world is hearing about this game because it's exploding onto the scene through controversy at first, through tight supply, the myth, the legend of Flesh and Blood. What I was saying was, as much as you've heard about this game, it is not that big yet. We consistently, per location, maybe get 10 players. That's more than the 5 we were getting last time I checked, the 7 we were getting last time I checked. And then when we have our large events, we have upwards of 30 to 40 players, with a few people coming in from out of town. We do have a very travel-heavy group here, which is very cool, because that means we get a lot of outside perspective as well, from people hitting Seattle, Montana, all that stuff. Oregon, Idaho, all that area all travels to a lot of these locations. And I think this local meta that we have here in the Pacific Northwest is fairly exciting. Lots of Hero C play that you don't see a whole lot of other locations. Lots of innovation. We're all willing to try a lot of things. Obviously, that could be the case everywhere, but just a hugely diverse meta, and I'll be reporting on that later throughout different podcasts. So once you get into your local store, kind of lose the plot every now and then, but I will get onto it again. When you jump into a local store and you do find it, you're going to see a plethora of sets. We're now 7 or 8 sets in, which is weird to think about because when I joined the game, we had 2 or 3. Don't just buy cards. Don't just buy booster packs. This game is very different. Whereas with Pokemon, you get certain Pokemon, you can kind of throw them together, you can kind of theme it pretty easily out of buying any random booster packs because the constant theme throughout Pokemon are their types. So some energy is useful for others, etc., etc., etc. Same with Magic the Gathering. You always have the green, white, red, black, blue. You have all those colors that are constant. So picking up any pack is fine. You will be able to eventually get into the game easily. Flesh and Blood, not the case. Flesh and Blood, akin to many of the popular esports nowadays, League of Legends, Dota, Rainbow Six Siege, it's Apex Legends, etc. It works on the hero system, which is kind of weird for a card game. You're picking your hero. You are not the wizard. You're not the trainer. You're picking your fighter that you're going to be for the fight. There's a plethora of characters. I think we're at 15 characters so far. Sounds like it could get out of hand if you're releasing some characters per set, but characters do rotate. And that's something we'll talk about later as well. To further the point, do not just buy a pack. Yeah, do not just go buy packs. You're going to find little decks. The pre-constructed decks are anywhere from $10 to $15, depending on your store location, how many of them they have, etc., etc. That's where you want to start. You want to start out by picking up Blitz deck. They are not the complete deck you're going to be using. They are not a 60-card deck plus equipment. They are just a starting point for a format called Blitz. A format I do not care for as much, but I will be covering and talking about because it is important to certain parts of our seasons. Blitz decks are little 40-card decks that just get you started to play the game. They have everything your hero needs, all the equipment they need to get started. They have all of their specific cards you need to get started. They're just a great jumping point. What does that look like? Well, we'll talk more about the specificities of how to get to start playing the game here in a bit. I just want to tell you how to get started. You're going to look for anything that catches your eye, like any game that I'm going to talk about on this, because obviously crashing cards on games will be more than just Flesh and Blood. I do want you to look at the heroes, the image of them, their name, their vibe, read about what they do on the box. As soon as one catches your eye, pick it up, grab it, have your friend do the same. I will be doing a video, hopefully within a few weeks of this podcast, and starting my channel on YouTube that way. And we'll just start learning how to play from scratch, and then I'll start doing guides, primers, things like that. Just all from my perspective, obviously. I'm not a professional, but I think I could be if I didn't have a job and all that. Like we all could. I believe in you all. Once you've grabbed your Blitz deck, feel it out, read the cards, just kind of get a general familiarity with the cards. I don't expect you to know what every part of it means. We'll go over the anatomy of a card later in this episode. Once you grab a blitz deck, wait, hang on for a bit. Don't quite jump into boosters yet. You're going to need to learn where your hero came from. If you buy a deck called Levia, the Shadowborn Abomination, she is a brute, and she is from a set called Monarch. If you buy that hero, and then go, oh, well, the store only has Tales of Aria. Monarch being the set for Levia. Tales of Aria, not where she's from. Tales of Aria will only have Elemental and all this other a bunch of cards you won't understand, and they won't fit Levia, and they won't be able to be used by her. You don't want that. You don't want that. Any knowledgeable local game store owner will be able to help guide you to what set goes to what set, what hero goes to what set, if they care about the game. If not, you'll be finding a local guru or waiting on the episode about this and how to build and what to prime. All that said, to summate all of that garbage, okay, TLDR, you're going to go into a local game shop. You're going to ask if they have Flesh and Blood. If not, move on to the next one. Once you do find it, you're going to find a blitz deck. You're going to find a hero that gels with you. You're going to find a hero that kind of connects with things you've already done. This game is kind of an RPG. You get to equip your hero with certain gear that can fit them, of course, just like every RPG. And you're going to start building from there. After you determine the hero that you like a lot, you're going to find out what set they're from, and then you can buy boosters from there, although, much like the professor, I do also suggest buying singles. We're now going to talk about how to play your first game. To play your first game, you have to understand what the cards do and what they are. So I will start with the hero. I'll start with a prime example of the hero that I began with. I began this game with Dorinthia Ironsong. Dorinthia Ironsong is a hero card. She is going to be the centerpiece to your board if you choose her. It's your hero. They go in the dead center of your board. They have an effect in the middle of the card. That's what they do. That's the text on the card. Hers is once per turn, when your weapon attack hits, you can attack an additional time with it. From there, you'll infer that she uses her weapon quite a bit. Don't focus on that. Just focus on the fact that her effect, what the hero does for you, is in the center text of the card. All of that will be right there for you. At the top is obviously the name. Art is in between that. Bottom left, you're going to see intellect. It's a blue symbol. Looks like a little gem inside of some kind of a goblet, right? Something like that. Most heroes will have 4. Some have different numbers. All you need to know is at the end of your turn, you will draw up to the number displayed by the intellect. If at the end of the turn you have 1 card left in hand, and you're done with your turn, you will draw 3 cards, so your hand equals your intellect. 4 intellect, 4 cards in hand. Very few things change this. Very few things change this, and when they do, they are very powerful and very scary. It's insane to get a 25% increase to any resource in any game. Just look at it like that. After that, you're going to have what kind of hero they are. Dorinthia Ironsong happens to be a warrior. There are many classes in this game. Brutes, absolute savagery, ninjas, really high combo mechanics. They're the go wide kind of decks. Wizards, they're some of the only people that use instants in this game very well, or at least play at instant speed. After that, you have talents. That's not all of them. I'm just saying that I just don't want to drag on forever. Then you have talents. Some heroes use the light. Some heroes use the dark. Others use the earth, ice. So eventually we'll see like a draconic warrior, a light. We already have a light warrior, but light warrior, dark warrior, etc., etc. The only cards you can use in your deck are generic cards and cards that match your hero's type. That is why the center of that piece of cardboard is so important. Warrior hero. I now know that I can use warrior cards and generic cards in Dorinthia Ironsong. Might seem limiting, but it makes her more focused on the specific attacks. You'll learn as you play. Next to that is a green symbol with, I don't know how to describe that, a kind of Ouroboros, maybe like a weird yin-yang kind of. It's a swirling symbol. Green. And it has a number next to it. That's how much life you start with. So, what have we covered so far? To get into Flesh and Blood, you need to head to a local game store. you need to find a beginner product such as a Blitz beginner pre-constructed deck. You will then ask the LGS or anyone in the area, hey, where did this hero come from? What can I buy to help supplement this deck and get started on my journey of deck building? After that, you'll get familiar with your cards. With the hero card, you'll be able to see now your name, art, effect, intellect, and life. That's all we know so far. That's very much so the very beginning of your journey. Next up, we're going to look at equipment. Equipment are a separate part of your deck. They do not go into the shuffle. They start on the field face down, and you reveal them at some point in time. We'll go over start of the game procedures later. Equipment are very much so what they sound like. They're your helmet. They're your gloves. They're your boots. You get to choose what these are. Choices are a little limited, but there's still enough to make it interesting, and you can find new combinations now that we were 7 sets in. For example, my Dorinthia Ironsong deck is built with an Arcanite Skull Cap. You don't need to really know what it is, you just need to know it's a helmet. Brave Forge Bracers, those are my gauntlets. Courage of Blade Hold, that's my chest piece, that's my breastplate. Then I have some Null-Rune gloves, Null-Rune hood, Null-Rune robes. Those are all for arcane protection, we'll get into that later. And Refraction Bolters, those are my greaves. That's just kind of like what your character wears throughout the game. What's very unique about Flesh and Blood is in every other game, you kind of build your board state, and then you get stronger as the game goes on. You develop your abilities. Not so in Flesh and Blood. In Flesh and Blood, your equipment starts at its best. Your hero starts at his or her strongest. Everything is as good as it's going to be at the beginning, and it only goes downhill from there. Just like a real fight, you will wear yourself out, you'll start to attack weaker, and your equipment won't be as helpful. The next thing you're going to need to see in your deck that you open for your pre-constructed deck is going to be your weapon. For Dorinthia, that's the Dawnblade. It's a 2-handed sword, and yes, you can wield 1 to 2-handed weapons, and even in some cases a shield. She uses a 2-handed sword. That's kind of what drew me to her. I like 2-handed swords in most RPGs. We're not going to go over what all these cards do, you just need to know that you have them. You'll have your weapons, your equipment, and those go on the board with your hero. After that, we'll talk about the anatomy of the equipment. Just like every other card game, at the top you're going to have your name, you're going to have your art in the dead center. The middle text box will tell you what it does. You'll learn what the key words and what things do as you play the game. And then it'll tell you if the armor has some kind of weakness. Does it get battle worn? Does it break immediately on you? Then it's going to tell you what kind of equipment it is. I'll use the example of the Arcanite Skull Cap, my head piece. It is a generic equipment. That means it's not warrior specific. Any hero can use this. It starts with 1 armor, and that is denoted by the little silver shield in the bottom right. In the bottom right of most cards will be what your defense value is for that card. The same will be for my bracers that have 2 armor, my Courage of Blade Hold that has 2 armor, Refraction Bolters have 1 armor. Not all equipment pieces will have armor, but all of them will do something in some way or another. Now that we've covered equipment that has the armor and the effects, we'll cover the weapon. Very similarly, at the top you'll have the name, middle is the art, text box will tell you exactly what it does. Though, keep in mind if you choose an older hero, it is a new game, and the words are a little muddied sometimes. Clarification is available online, and I will go over any errata that I find relevant when I'm talking about cards in primers. At the very bottom left, you're going to see a little spear tip. That spear tip denotes the attack power of a card. Typically, that power won't change a whole lot, but there are ways to change it. Those are going to be the combat tricks of this game. Becomes very important with warriors and many other cards. Just something to pay attention to. The bottom left is the base power available to that card. Next, we're going to move on to just everyday cards that you're going to put into your deck. The deck is entirely comprised of non-equipment, non-weapon cards available to you throughout the game. The only thing you need to put in your deck is to make sure that it is either a generic or it matches your hero's class and or talent. We'll start with a very simple card, just as an example. I'm actually going to use the example of Wounding Blow, a generic card from Welcome to Wraith, the first set of Flesh and Blood. This is how we're going to look at the anatomy of a card. The top left is how many resources, if you're from other card games, that would be mana, energy, etc. How many resources the card provides. In the top right is the cost. It will have what you will identify as the resource symbol, but with a number in the center of it. That tells you how much the card's going to cost. Then you have the nameplate, if I haven't said that already. The nameplate in the center top. You'll also notice a stripe of color at the top that will identify it as red, yellow, or blue. Certain cards look for certain colors of cards, and also those typically denote how many resources that card can provide you. The beautiful one that I'm looking at right now happens to be done by Sonia Sandoval. Honestly, I do like the art for Wounding Blow. It's kind of messed up. Just going around attacking villagers indiscriminately. This was a huge foreshadow, and this is something that I like about this card game quite a bit, is when you look at the art, it tells you about what's going to happen in a year or so. Wounding Blow came out a long time ago. Obviously, the 2020 early beginnings delayed quite a bit of it. But in this art, you can see an Imperial soldier wearing extremely ornate metal shoulders, a crown, long tail on top of it, striking down a peasant in very obviously poor clothes. It's absolutely awful, but that's what happened in the set Uprising, one of the last sets that just came out. If you really do pay attention to the art in this game, you'll be rewarded. After that, usually the text box contains the effect of the card. In this scenario, it's just flavor text. Farmhands, villagers, and slaves. Easily replaceable wretches that must be taught the joys of obedience. Yeah, Uprising was a very obvious name for that set. So, we've identified how much resources the card provides, how much it costs, what color stripe it has, the art, and the text box. In the bottom left, you're going to find the attack power. This is how much damage it threatens to provide once you swing with it. In the center of the card, you're going to be told what kind of card it is. This one is a generic action attack. Generic denotes it can be used in most decks, unless for some reason you can't. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to, but things are going wild in this game. Action means it takes an action point. We'll get over what that means. We'll go over what that means later on when we talk about the game itself. And then attack. That tells you that this is going to go into the combat chain, one of the primary mechanics of this game. You are starting an attack on your opponent with this card. In the bottom right, you will see the armor identifier that you see in your equipment. Same exact symbol. This one provides 3 block. You'll notice that cards that are expendable provide a little bit more block, but many balancing mechanics are going to be, this provides a little bit less resources, this costs a bit more, this attacks for less, or this has more defense. It's very, very well balanced, this card game. You'll start to learn the joys of where did I mess up by looking at what little exchanges you missed here and there. That's the anatomy of a card. That's how you're going to look at every single card in the pre-constructed deck that you purchased. Now, once you've decided on a pre-constructed deck and you have decided to pick up a few extra cards, or maybe you just want to get into the game, we've talked about one hero, but there are many. Wizards, illusionists, brutes, guardians, ninjas, warriors, mechanologists, rangers, runeblades. Many, many different classes for many, many different types of players. We've gone over the anatomy of the card. We've gone over what cost is, what pitch is, what defense is, what attack is. The 3 colors of the cards, the red, blue, yellow system, right? It all comes together to create this game, Flesh and Blood. And how you're going to start playing Flesh and Blood is by taking your deck, setting aside your equipment and your hero, and shuffling up. There are pre-templated playmats that will help you understand quite literally every zone that you're going to be utilizing to date. But just know that on the left side of your board, from top to bottom, will be head, chest, arms, and legs. That's where you're going to put like your wearable equipment. In the center of your board is typically your hero, and then their weapons are to their left and to their right. There is a zone under that called the arsenal. That's kind of where you put a little ace in the hole for later in the game. And then on the right, you'll put your deck in kind of like the center of the mat on the right. And then on top of that, you'll have the graveyard. Below that, you'll have the banish zone. And on the left, you'll have the pitch stack. All mechanics and all things we'll be covering later on when we talk about actually how to use those zones. And at the very top is a long section called the combat chain. That's where all of your attacks and blocks will go. Now, to play Blitz, the deck you purchased, you're going to take your young hero, your 40 cards, your 11 inventory cards. In this format, you can have 2 of every card and every color. For example, if you have 2 red, 2 yellow, and 2 blue cards of the same name, totally legal. You can have 2 of each of those types of cards. Each color is a different type of card. After that, that's the setup. That's the whole setup. You get your equipment on the left, your hero and weapon in the center, and your deck on the right after you've shuffled it up, presented for the cut, and gotten ready. As always, make sure to wish your opponent good luck. Make sure to have fun during the game. I have seen this game get very heated. It's just a bit more competitive feeling than any other game. have you ever played any game? For me, it was Rainbow Six Siege, where I would be the only one left on my team, and I could hear that goddamn heartbeat over and over, thumping away. While it said there was only 20 seconds left, it felt like an hour's worth of time, right? You just feel that pressure. This game, I have noticed, brings that feeling up more than any other. At every single top 8 I've played, my opponent's been shaking. Not because I'm like, raw, I'm not like I don't think I'm an intimidating dude, but like, it's an adrenaline pumping game because you know every single thing you do matters. It's amazing. I hope you feel that exact same thing as well. Point being, once you get started, weapons in the center, hero in the center, equipment on the left, deck on the right. You've all shuffled up on everything. You now understand what each card is. You understand that the top left is what it provides, the top right is the cost, the bottom left is the attack, the bottom right is the defense. And now you understand where to look for the text, etc., etc. You're going to sit down across from your opponent, say good luck, have fun, really feel the importance that it is to just have a good time playing this game. We're going to go over game procedure right now. So first, at the beginning of the game, you're just going to reveal what hero you're playing. You're going to turn it over onto the table, face up. You're going to be able to see what your opponent's playing as well. After that, you're going to decide who goes first. I like to flip a coin. I think it's nice and fair, easy. You just make sure you flip it up a little bit so it doesn't look like you're being a piece of shit. You just move on. You just move on from there. Next, you're going to take out whatever cards that you need for your arena, right? They'll say if you need to do that. You can select all of your equipment at this time. Don't reveal them to your opponent yet. Okay? After that, you're going to select all the cards that you want from your total deck. For the reason being that, I guess this is kind of weird. You don't sideboard in this game in a traditional way. You kind of preemptively do so. You actually just build a deck pre-game and then say, I want these cards in it and I want these cards out of it. And then you put those in. And that's your deck that you're going to present to your opponent after you shuffle it. Okay? Because this is a format of 1. It's not a 2 out of 3 format. You get 1 shot at winning. After all the cards are selected for your deck, after you selected your equipment and they're face down to the left and you've revealed your hero, you've already decided who's going first. Okay? You're then going to, shuffle up, present your opponent for the cut, and then you're going to start. After you set your deck down, reveal what equipment you have. What helmet, what greaves, everything. What are you wearing? That's what you reveal next. After that, you're going to draw up to your hero's intellect. Once you draw up to your hero's intellect, typically 4, you'll have a 4-card hand and you'll start the game. I'm just going to quickly go through very basic parts of the game to kind of cover most cards you should see in your first few games. There's a start phase, the beginning of the turn phase. Nobody gets to respond during this, but if something happens at the beginning of the turn, you do it now. So during the action phase, you're basically playing a game called red light, green light. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. Every action you play, and it will say the word action on the card. We've identified that earlier in the naming of the card, the templating of the card, identifying what a card's anatomy looks like. At the very bottom of the card, it said generic action in the example we used, remember? And it was an attack. So, because that's an action, it uses our action point. The red light turns on. The only way to turn that green light back on so you can play another card is to have go again or to gain an action point. Many cards have this effect built into them, the go again and the gain an action point. You just have to use them. And the trickiness starts to get into how do you play these in the right order? How do I make sure I have action points left over, etc., etc. But just remember, red light, green light. I've played an action card, red light's on. If it doesn't have go again or I don't have any action points left on, that red light's going to stay there and your turn's going to end. After that, the end phase is a little interesting to me. Players don't get priority during this. If you know what that means, it just means you can't act. The opponent can't do anything, you can't do anything. This is just going to happen. All right? So, at the beginning of end phase effects, all trigger now, just like at the beginning of the turn. If it says at the beginning of the turn, it triggers, no one can respond. At the end of the turn effect trigger, you can't respond. End of turn procedure occurs. All allies, dragons, illusions, whatever, all those are reset to their base life total printed on the card. The turn player, if it's your turn, you can put a card from your hand in the arsenal face down. That's that little ace in the hole that I talked about earlier. It's like storing a card for later. Make sure it's playable and really easy to play, otherwise it gets stuck there and you don't get use of that zone a whole lot. We'll talk more about advanced concepts in the arsenal later. Then you put all cards in your pitch, all cards that you've used to pay for cards. on the bottom of your deck in an order of your choice. This is incredibly important, okay? So I guess I'll go over real quick how you play a card. I'll swing with my weapon for 1 resource. To pay for that, I take a red card from my hand and put it to the side of my deck in that pitch zone that I talked about earlier. So the weapon generated the cost of a resource. I paid the cost with a resource. At the end of the turn, whatever I put in that resource pile, I put on the bottom of my deck in an order I choose. If you're really good, you will be able to track where in your deck that is. It is actually how I won my first big event, the Road to Nationals in my local sport. Just being able to track where my big attacks were and setting up huge turns for that guaranteed me wins. Certain decks do it, certain decks don't. Some decks like to see the stack flow through like that. Some don't. The fast ones don't. Pro tip. But that's just something you're going to have to track. After that, we're going to talk about ending the game. A game immediately ends when a player wins or the game is a draw. This is done by reducing your opponent to 0 life right now. A player can lose the game if your life total is 0, or if there's an effect that says you lose the game. We actually just had a card printed that does that. I think, let me read it real quick. There was a card. It has some requirements on it, but if it's an effective use of that card, you will cause your opponent to lose the game on the spot. Not very common, and it's not technically usable against everybody, so we just won't worry about that right now. A player loses the game if they concede. Now, if someone deems that it is absolutely an unwinnable game state, you can concede. And that's basically it, okay? So I want to recap on that because it got a little more out of hand than I thought. I kind of forget sometimes that this is a game and it can't be explained so easily. So, too long didn't read. Start phase. Nobody can respond. Anything that says at the start of the turn happens here. Action phase. You're playing red light, green light with your own hand and you're trying to coordinate go again and action points to string together the most effective attack turn that you can. And then the end phase. Nobody gets priority. All end of turn stuff happens here. Allies get reset to whatever life total they start with. You may put a card into your arsenal at this point. Each player puts all cards in their pitch zone, cards you paid cards for, etc., on the bottom of your deck in any order. All players lose all action points and resources, so nothing carries over. And then you draw up to your intellect. That's important because you can gain intellect. And then obviously ending the game, kill your opponent or hit him with an effect that says you lose the game. So that was kind of like your quick primer on how a turn works. And I want to talk about that getting into good habits. At the very end of this, I want to leave you with an impression you need to get into good habits to make this a successful run for you. It will feel really bad if you don't have these habits in place and you lose a game because it was something you could have done, right? So just remember, everything I'm going to say here is a little more complicated than it has been. I say that, but I feel like I've done a terrible job of simplifying this game. It might make more sense in the video form that will be on Crash Command Games YouTube. This whole game is just combat, right? Largely. So, one thing to note. There's that start of game phase, but right after that, the action step damn well may as well be called the combat step. So what you're going to do is you're going to start by opening the combat chain with an attack. To do that, you'll look at your hand and you'll say, hey, this has the word attack on it. I'm going to play it. Once you play it, make sure that you can pay its costs. If you can, it becomes a valid attack. It's an object that has a target. You're targeting your opponent. You're targeting their allies, their dragons, their illusions, whatever the hell you're targeting. Okay? The attack starts, and you start through a whole phase of the game. This is the combat step. Once you declare your attack, your opponent gets a chance to respond with whatever instance or whatever, and then you move on to the attack step. It's now officially there. If it has any phrases or words that say, when this attacks, do this, x, 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 blah, 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 you're going to do all that stuff right here. After all the priority is passed, you said, hey, do you have any responses to my attack? They say no. You move on to the defense step. You say, okay, do you have any blocks? Make sure to don't be a shark. Don't try to angle shoot. Don't wait for them to do something and then say, well, actually, this step is here. Try to be nice about it if it's an armory event. You and many people are still learning. Just remember that after the attack is made and they say they don't have any responses immediately to the attack, you say, okay, do you have any blocks? Be polite about it. Do you have any blocks? Make sure to ask them. This game's about participation. Obviously, it's not your obligation to make sure your opponent's doing everything, but it is at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Because later on, someone says, "Hey, do you remember when this guy sharked me?" Then someone else goes, "Yeah, he sharked me too." You become the shark of the community. Nobody wants to play with you, etc., etc. So, in combat, after you attack, ask if they have any blocks, because then if they say no or yes or block with whatever cards, you move on to the reaction step. Once they block or don't block and you have no responses, you move on to the reaction step. The attacker will react first. Then the defender has a chance to play, you've guessed it, defense reactions. If nothing else is played during this step, instance, attack reacts, defense reacts, okay? Then you move on to the next step. But I do want to make it clear. The attacker reacts first. The defender then has the option to react. Okay? That is all in the same step. If you both pass priority, you're done. You move on from the reaction step. You move to the damage step. And then, in other form, if they have a react, then you get a chance to attack react on top of that. As long as people are continuing to react, and no one has said, and two people have not in a row said, I'm done. So you go, I have no more reacts. They say, I have no more reacts. If that hasn't happened yet, you continue the react step. Once that's done, you move on to the damage step. The damage step is a game state where physical damage of the active link is calculated and applied. I made that sound complicated. It's basically, my attack has 5 power, your total defense is 4. I'm going to hit you for 1. Very basic stuff. But the important thing is, that's when hits are generated. That phrase is very key, very crucial. Many cards say on hit, or when this hits. That's when all this is generated, and it gets applied to the next step. Okay? An attack is considered to have hit if it deals damage to the target during the damage step. Something can prevent this prior, right? Prevention effects, defense, blocking, etc. But if when all is said and done, your power is greater than their defense, you're going to hit. After that, you have something called the resolution step. Okay? It's a game state where everything is done. The first chain link, right, the little circle thing for a mental representation. The chain link is done, it's closed, and we're going to either choose to create another chain link, that other circle into a circle, that little chain, we're going to link the chain, or we're going to break the chain. Okay? All that means is, are you going to continue the attack or not? During the link step, which comes after the resolution step, it's a game state where you can either continue or not. If the attack has go again, or if anything you've done said the word go again, or anything you said gains an action point here, you get that action point. When I said earlier you're playing red light, green light, and you need go again, this, after damage, after defense, after attack, all that, right now, after that damage has been dealt, that go again checks. If your attack has go again, you get that action point, that green light turned back on, you can start playing stuff again. After you've decided whether or not to continue the attack or not, you start the close step. It's where the combat chain closes. Anything that says when the combat chain closes happens here. Equipment gets returned to its location if you blocked with your equipment, because you can block with your equipment. If everybody passes in succession, you all say we're done. You just move on to the end step. That's just the end of it, right? That is the whole game. I know that may have been a lot because it's a brand new card game to many people. And I don't want to say that this is an easy experience, but that is the whole game. Summation. How to play your first game. It was a little more complicated overall. There are some in-depth explanations that you can go back and listen to if they went by a little too quickly. But if you're here for the TLDR, this is it. Okay? Show them your hero. Flip a coin, roll some dice, figure out who's going to go first. Choose your equipment that you're going to start on the board, and choose the cards that are going to start in your deck. Shuffle up your deck and play. Okay? To play, you're going to go through a start phase. Nobody can react during this phase. You just do stuff that says at the start of the turn. You're going to go through the action phase. That's where you're going to do your attacking, defending, reacting, damaging, and continuing to attack if you can. If not, you move on. Then there's that end step. Nobody can do anything during the end step. There's no priority. You and your opponent have no actions here. You just simply lose your actions, lose your resources, arsenal a card if you want to. Put a card from your hand into that arsenal zone under your hero. That's tucking it away for later use. It's your little ace in the hole. Put your cards that you've used to pay for other cards aka your pitch. Put those on the bottom of your deck in an order of your choice. I'm not going to say try to memorize them right off the bat, but try to memorize them. And then you're going to draw up to your hero's intellect. That is the whole game. But in this podcast, we went over what we are, what I'm going to be doing. I might have some guests on here to talk about a semi-competitive look at this game. How to get into it. Get to your local game store. Talk about Flesh and Blood. See if they have it. If they do, pick up a Blitz deck. Talk to them about what set it came from, etc., etc. You're going to start to fold into your community, if not build it. Those are the products that are a good starting point. I've talked to you how to play your first game. It was a little more complicated than I'd like it to have been, but I hope somebody gets to the summation. It really is that simple. The good habits of walking through each step in order. Start, action, attack, defend, attack, react, defend, react, damage, close, link, end. Sounds like a lot, but like Magic the Gathering, untap, upkeep, draw, main phase 1, combat, attacks, blocks, instant speed stuff, main phase 2, right? It sounds like a lot, but you get used to it, right? It's just a new game. This is the end of this episode. I would like to talk about my local meta, my MLM, but it's just, this has already gone long enough. We'll save local meta talk, primers, heroes, and things like that for next time. I really do want to leave off with one thing. Suggestions for heroes to start with. If it were up to me and I were teaching you to play this game, I would tell you to start with heroes from Welcome to Rathe. They are simple. They are effective. 3 of them are top 8ing tournaments left and right. They're very strong. You don't have to worry about talents. Their cards are plentiful. They're simple to understand. There's not a single hero that I didn't almost start with in Welcome to Rathe. I love them all. Okay? If you're wondering who they are, Dorinthia, the warrior. Rhinar, the brute. Katsu, the ninja. And then Bravo, the guardian. If you want a quick primer on those, not a primer, sorry. If you want a quick crash into what those are, warriors use their weapon to attack a lot. Brutes use huge attacks and block pretty decently. Ninjas string together lots of little attacks to a big effect. Guardians break people's arms, backs, and debilitate them while having incredible defensive capabilities. Okay, that's the rundown of what those heroes are. Those would be my suggested starting points. Yes, there are more interesting heroes, but I think those will teach you the fundamentals of the game better than any other else. I just want to thank anybody who took the time to listen to this podcast and listen to my absolute bullshit of a droning librarian-ass voice through this first part. But I just want to get key structure foundation for the card games in my podcast, because I feel like they're where you start. This podcast was funded by Crash Command Games. That's my TCG player account. I am trying to create a local game store someday in my future. Right now, there's only Magic the Gathering products and Flesh and Blood products. Pokemon products are fairly hard to get a hold of. Other resources for you to check out on top of this will be my Discord. Link will be in the description. We like to play video games there. We like to play card games there. It's kind of a small community because I'm just getting this whole media presence going. Make sure to check that out. Look out for that YouTube video that's going to be coming out. I'm going to start uploading videos about how to play, primers, and things like that as companion media for this. Thanks for chipping in, Jooms. Hope to see you next time. I guess hear ya or listen to you next time. If you have any questions or anything about any other card games, feel free to talk to us in that Discord. I'm going to have the link in the bottom. It's a small community. I want to grow it into a bigger place for us to play cards. I want to start hosting events there as well. Again, any questions in there, drop it in the Flesh and Blood section or any of the card game sections. Thanks again, and this podcast is zeroed.